Okay, so you want to open a bar. No, it's not a bar. It's a social space. Okay, well, it's a club. Well, it's a club, but it's really about artists and about engaging in the community. We want a screening room. We also would love a bar and a coffee area where people could hang out. It would be great if we had tenants involved, but it would also be great if we had an upper space where people could work and flow together. We want to incubate, we want to encourage and socialize. A place where you can just relax between meetings or obligations. A place where you can have an idea and say, hey, you know what would be great if we could do this or we could do that. That's what this space is all about.
Well, welcome everyone to our panel here. Very excited to host a discussion on taking small steps to big change, translating vision into action. I'll be the moderator for this panel. I'm Stephen Olikara. I'm the founder and CEO of the National Millennial Action Project, which activates young elected officials across party lines to bridge our political divisions and strengthen our democracy. And I'm based here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, my hometown. Now, I want to say a big thank you to Lisa and to Beth and to John and the entire Ridley family for hosting this Social Justice Summit. I'm very honored to be part of it. And this panel in particular is all about building coalitions for transformative change. And when I was speaking with Lisa over the summer about the vision for this panel, we realized that bridge building across different sectors, across party lines, is so essential in Wisconsin and in our country in order to create the change that we're looking for. And so we're taking a cross-sector approach with this panel, engaging the business community, the corporate community, the NGO community, and the legislative community. And we have outstanding representatives from all of those spaces. So let's introduce our panel here. First, we've got Adam Gabornitz with Northwestern Mutual. He is the Assistant Director of Diversity and Inclusion, and he's also been involved with tech and startups in Milwaukee for many years. Adam, great to have you on.
Thanks, Steve. It's really great to be here.
Appreciate it. Now we've got George Hinton. He's the CEO of the Social Development Commission, which is a community action agency focused on supporting Milwaukee residents living in poverty. George, thanks for coming on our panel today.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. And finally, we've got my longtime friend and who's active with the Millennial Action Project, State Representative Jonathan Brostoff. He represents Milwaukee in the state legislature, and him and I have worked together on a number of initiatives around bridging the political divide. Jonathan, thanks for being on the panel.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, now let's jump into it. I'm gonna do a round of questions so our audience can get to know all of you a bit better and also how you work in your current domain. So let's start with you, George. As I mentioned, you're with the Social Development Commission, and you've been involved in issues of poverty in Milwaukee for many years. So tell us a bit more how you got involved in that issue and also how the SDC operates.
Yeah, well, my story goes back. I am the father of millennials. And I started in working with people in poverty way back when I was working in healthcare. I call myself a retired healthcare executive or a recovering healthcare executive because I worked in Children's Hospital for 13 years and then with Aurora for another 12. And my last job was the president of Aurora Sinai Medical Center, which I saw a lot. Our hospital was really the front line for people who were sick in the northwest part of the city, northern part of the city, especially with people who were in poverty. But it was a great hospital. The staff was outstanding, and we did a good job. But while I was there, I saw a lot of need. And so when I transitioned from healthcare, actually, I was going to go back into another healthcare role, but I had this opportunity to go to SDC, which is a social services organization. And the mission really intrigued me because my passion has always been whatever I learn or do, I want to be able to use that to make our community a better community. And I saw a lot of pain through my lens of where I was coming through the doors of SDC, Aurora Sinai at the time, especially through the emergency room. And I wanted to understand why that was happening. I've been at SDC now for 7 years. It's been a huge learning experience. I tell a lot of my friends, I wish I would have did social services before becoming a healthcare executive, because I think I would have approached the whole question about how do we make sure we have equity within healthcare in the communities that I'm from. I'm from Milwaukee. I'm from the Central City. I lived in 53206 and other zip codes throughout Milwaukee. And so I was fortunate enough to be successful, but I've never lost or left the communities in which I lived.
That's great, George. And tell us a bit more about some of the programs that the SDC is involved in. I mean, you're on the front lines of helping Milwaukee residents with, in many ways, two pandemics right now. One is just immediate relief to the COVID-19 pandemic, but also to the ongoing racial injustice and economic injustice pandemics we've had. What are some of those programs that are providing that direct support?
Yeah, SDC is a community action agency. There's one of 1,000 in the country, one of 16 in the state of Wisconsin. We are the largest. We are responsible for all of Milwaukee County. And what we do is we have various services. We have all different types of services: employment services, education services. We have career building services. We do VITA, which is free tax services. We do weatherization. We do lead abatement. We do outreach to try to help the community understand what, especially moms and dads who have young children, the effects of lead and how to protect themselves, their children from the lead effects. And then the other thing about SDC that you need to know is it's a commission on poverty. It's a dual purpose organization. So it not only does programming, but it's also charged by the city and the county to address issues of poverty, to speak on issues of core. And this is what's attracted me so much to the agency. It's the root cause issues that cause poverty, especially generational poverty, which I'm concerned with. And so I'm very high on this organization's ability to be more impactful on the community in the future.
That's great. Thanks, George. Now let's go to Adam. Now, you've been involved in building social and economic infrastructure in Milwaukee for many years leading up to your time with Northwestern Mutual. So tell us a bit more about your background and also how you ultimately chose a legacy Milwaukee company as your vehicle for making change in the community.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, one of the things that's always been important in my career is really working with people, whether it be in a sales role right when I got out of school, to actually working in some of the social services sectors, to joining a longtime friend of mine doing kind of the entrepreneurial thing, to being in some large companies over the last couple of years. It's really been about saying, how are we doing things better? And more importantly, helping people here in the city of Milwaukee. And I think the biggest thing for me has always been that employment is this opportunity to be a great equalizer. And what are the abilities for companies in Milwaukee to have high wage jobs for people, to make sure that we're partnering closely with an SDC to continue to bridge the gap between people that want to work and the opportunities that are out there. And it's also, more importantly, making sure that we're thinking differently. And it was exciting to have an opportunity to join NM a couple of years ago now, and I've even transitioned to a second role at the company. And to me, it's an organization that's really trying to be forward thinking while still recognizing and respecting the heritage that it has, being in Milwaukee for over 150 years. So it's been cool to be there. It's been cool to see some of the transitions and the changes, and ideally be doing some good here to help not only the organization, but more broadly the city.
That's great. Just a quick maybe summary of some of the top initiatives you have going on right now within the diversity and inclusion portfolio at NM.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the biggest things that I have going on right now that I'm super proud to be a part of is a partnership that we have, which is called Talent of the Future. And we're partnering very closely with a new nonprofit in Milwaukee called All In Milwaukee. And All In Milwaukee is really working very closely with students in the Central City who are lower income to help them get full ride scholarships to local universities, to acquire mentorship and then also internship opportunities, and ideally be hired into full-time roles in the Milwaukee area upon graduation. So in partnership with my area, as well as the foundation at Northwestern Mutual, we're working to put 80 scholars through the program over the next 4 years, and over $1.6 million in funding being allocated as well. So a really great opportunity for us to support the community and also build this next generation of diverse talent as a pipeline for Milwaukee, and then ideally for Northwestern Mutual. So that's been a big thing. That's kind of a combination between what's happening both internally at NM, but also what's impacting the Milwaukee community.
That's great. Thanks, Adam. Now let's go to State Representative Brostoff. Now, Jonathan, one of the favorite questions I like to ask of people in state legislatures and elected office in general is, how did you decide to run for office? So tell us a bit more about your background and also how you chose government and the legislative body as a vehicle for creating change in your community.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me again, and thanks to No Studios and everyone involved with this Money Auction project. My story starts many years ago. I was 14 and was taking the bus home from school, and I saw an advertisement for one of the homeless shelters in town called Pathfinders, and I ended up being kind of intrigued by it, so I wrote down the number, and I called them up and I said, hey, do you need any volunteers? And they said, we actually do have an opportunity for teenage volunteers to get trained next week. And I kind of went from there, and I ended up working and volunteering in a myriad of different social service agencies and shelters all throughout my teenage and college years. And that really kind of set me on the path of going towards, going more in the service industry side of things as opposed to any other track. And so I decided to do my AmeriCorps service, which is a different shelter through Public Allies. And that really kind of got me activated as far as learning the importance of not only what I was doing, the kind of activism in the community, as well as the direct service, but also resource allocation and rules making that comes with government. So I ended up getting a little more involved with that and working on some campaigns of people who I thought would be good for the community. And as I got older, my kind of intention was the same, but you get more capabilities and therefore more responsibilities. And I decided that I wanted to kind of maximize the good I could do. And I felt the best way to do that would be through working in the legislature. So I ran and got elected my first time in around 2014. So been here ever since, and it has been a wild ride. So that's kind of my story and how I got here.
Now, you've been working on a number of different social justice issues during your time in the state legislature. Tell us about some of the bigger issues that you've been focusing on, and then a little bit later in the panel, we'll get into some of the methodologies you used to be successful. But give us a quick overview of the issues that you've prioritized during your service in the legislature.
Sure. Well, I'm kind of a busy bee and have my a lot of various interests I've been working on, including things that range as widely towards the mental health side of things and disabilities rights, as well as consumer protections and making sure that people aren't being taken advantage of from that, and economic justice and poverty, racial disparities, criminal justice reform, and aging and long-term care issues has been a pretty big one over the years for me. Gun violence prevention, and again, I've had quite a myriad of different issues, and I've learned a lot about a lot of different things, and still have a lot to learn. But I would say the main thing I've become known for, the expert in consumer protections and licensure, and the other thing is around deaf rights and deaf access, and actually that came together in the same way because there's this movement to and there's a picture of me getting a haircut that's also related to it, but there's this movement across the country to basically eliminate professional licensing. And when the deaf community heard about that in Wisconsin, a lot of members really freaked out because it took a long time and a lot of work to get sign language interpreting licensed. And what that means, practically speaking, is getting a minimum safety standard and competency standards for the people who are going to be giving you basically access to the rest of the hearing world in a certain sense. So that I happen to have a lot of deaf friends because of some personal experiences of mine. And I got a lot of messages asking for help on this. And then there happened to be a separate issue around licensing for sign language interpreting in Wisconsin that was time sensitive because of some internal mismanagement of an accreditation agency that we contracted through here in Wisconsin, and some updates that needed to happen that were very time sensitive. So I ended up basically focusing 90% of my legislative effort, my office on that, and kind of becoming the point person in all the different parts of the state for it. And it took a lot of work and a lot of educating, and we ended up getting the bill passed with unanimous bipartisan support in both bodies and with strong support from the governor. And thankfully, we averted the huge disaster for the deaf community, actually, and made things much better. But yeah, I ended up committing myself so much. I said, look, I'm not getting my hair cut until we get this done. And so you saw the Jew fro growing out, and it was kind of a cathartic process to, when we finally were able to pass the bill, get it cut together. We did a charity cut with a local deaf barber for the Wisconsin Association of the Deaf, as well as the WISRID, the Wisconsin Interpreting Organization, who both helped out a lot. So yeah, so I've kind of become the state expert around deaf issues, I would say, and I've had a lot of help, and we had some broad bipartisan support, but I'm sure we'll get into that later.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I remember seeing you, Jonathan, throughout that year, and your hair just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But I really do applaud you for that commitment. It really, in my view, represents politics at its best. The way that you were committed to it, the way that you heard a concern from the community that was really not being represented until you really kind of stepped in as their leader and ultimately built bridges to get something done. So we'll get into that a bit more. But I think, when you hear so many cynical narratives about politics, this was a story that makes you feel hopeful. So thank you for that, Jonathan. Now let's go back to Adam, because one of the big themes of this panel is how we're building bridges and building coalitions and building partnerships. And we were talking before the panel a bit about one of your initiatives with IMMKE that really was a great example of how you brought a number of different spaces together, from a major company, artistic organizations, the startup community. So tell us a bit more about that initiative and what it represents in terms of how the community can build collaborations for change and move the needle on issues, whether it's better diversity and better representation in entrepreneurship spaces, building better cohesion. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the IMMKE Fest thing was really something that came out of a desire to say, where are the places that if you are in the startup community, any type of startups, could you come together and see every different part of the city equally represented? And when I had the opportunity to connect with Lisa for the first time as No Studios was starting to open, I thought, you've got this amazing space, which is very representative of not only the creative space, but something new and something different in Milwaukee. And you have all this stuff going on in the city more generally, which to me kind of feels like a little bit of a renaissance of stuff happening over here, stuff happening over here, stuff happening over there. And I said, what can we do to try to bring that together? And more importantly, what can we try to do to create an opportunity for everybody in the city to show up and feel welcome and feel comfortable? So big shout out to Lisa and all the crew at No Studios for letting us experiment with it. But the idea was simple. It was saying, what does entrepreneurship look like in Milwaukee? Who's doing some really good things? And how do we elevate those messages more broadly across the community so people know the great things that are going on? And I think that's one of the biggest challenges when you talk about how we're kind of breaking down some of the silos or working together more collectively across sector, is people have to communicate. People have to know what's going on. And that storytelling piece is such a powerful part of bringing people together and connecting. And when you think about John's vision and everything that Lisa's executing on, it's storytelling, it's bringing people together, it's a collective place where everybody feels welcome. And IMMKE Fest was trying to be representative of that. I am Milwaukee, you are Milwaukee, we are Milwaukee. And it was a lot of fun to execute on it. And I think we made some impact too.
And what would you say was one of the biggest, you were talking about these cross-sector collaborations, what do you think was one of the biggest challenges in building those partnerships within the community?
When I think about a challenge with something like that, the first thing was just getting people together and saying, hey, here's a new thing we're going to try. Do you want to be a part of it? And I don't necessarily mean the challenge in the sense of when we were talking to people were saying, no, I'm not interested in it, because people were really embracing it. But even bringing up the idea in the first place. So very thankful that I had an organization that I'm working for that empowered me to go out and do those things. Very grateful to have somebody like Lisa saying, sure, you can host it at our new building. We've never done something like that before. Let's make it happen. So I think the biggest challenge is just getting up the courage in some instances to say, let's do something new, let's do something different. And then also having a little bit of trust, some faith, if you will, that if you pull something positive together, people are going to want to be a part of it. But I think I was lucky enough that I had some support that allowed me to make some of those things happen, because if not, I think it would have been very difficult. It has been difficult, I think, in a lot of ways.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And just going back to your earlier point about storytelling, I think part of the idea here is how do you tell a shared story where everyone feels like they have a part in it in order to build those partnerships. So that's awesome. Now, George, I want to go back to the SDC and some of the initiatives that you've been working on and how that materializes in terms of partnerships, because when you're working on issues of poverty, it's inextricably linked to public policy. And so tell us a bit more about the engagements you have with the policymaking community, things that go well, things that don't go well, where they can learn from you. Here's what works. Maybe this is something that we could scale up. Tell us a bit more about those types of conversations.
Yeah, I think you hit a good point when you said what works well and what doesn't work well, because I think when it works well is when we're taking the opportunity to listen to each other, listening to perspectives, not only from the different sectors of our community, but also understanding what the community needs in terms of, especially with people in poverty. Sometimes we look at people in poverty and we try to put them in one big group, but really individually, everybody's different and everybody's poverty is different. But there are some things that we need to work on to make sure that it makes sense. When I talk to legislators, for example, about grant designs, the grant designs can't be so restrictive that they actually don't result in the intent of the grant. So sometimes you can be so prescriptive about what you want done that you actually miss the boat. I'll give you an example. I remember talking about a foster care support grant, which is supposed to help young people who are aging out of foster care to then find the next steps in their lives. From a community perspective, aging out of foster care is the best way to do that is to catch the young people while they're still attached to some institution that allows you to work with them, like school. That means you got to work with them maybe at around 16 years old to get them ready for the transition when they're no longer in school. And they may go to college, they may not. But you want to work with them early so you can help them understand, here's what you need to get ready for. Well, this particular grant waited until the kids were 18 and a half. And basically what happens is the tree grabs them before we get a chance to work with them. And so the design of the grant itself just didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So what I really try to do is I try to talk to our legislators about design of grants that make sense. And then when I talk to my corporations, I say, don't be too restrictive either, because sometimes I need the flexibility from private dollars to make sure that the grant dollar, the money from the federal government, state government, or from the city, so I can have some flexibility to make sure it's not so tight that we can't help people that are truly in need. Mm-hmm. And there's great examples of that. And I'll use one, for example. In SDC, we just did a grant to put money out into the community for rent assistance. We worked with the state and we worked with landlords, which I look as business people. What the wonderful thing is we all worked well together. The state was listening to us and was willing to make modifications to the design of the rent assistance program. And landlords were engaged with their renters to try to help them be able to access these dollars. We were able to put that money out, almost $7 million out into the community in less than 2 months. Fortunately, I have some more money for the community, which is about $15 million from the city. We've learned a lot from that opportunity from the state, and the city has also designed a process that has taken advantage of what we learned from the state process. And then again, we're going to look to our landlords to make sure that they are engaged in the process, but also supporting people who are definitely in need right now and need just an opportunity to try to have some help until they're able to get jobs again. So when we work together, it goes well. When we don't work together, we can miss the point. So that's that's something that I constantly work on as I look for ways to make sure that we're all working on this together. We need the state, we need the government agencies, we need the county agencies, we need them to be there to provide the money necessary to help people who are in poverty. But we also need the corporations to understand these are people who are in poverty who don't necessarily want to be in poverty, but are looking for opportunities so that they can take care of themselves. But you can't look at them as one group of people. They are individual people who have individual needs.
That's right. And when you're bringing these different stakeholder groups together, are there any examples you can share where a model just worked out really well, where you were able to, you were talking about some grant programs that had, well-intentioned, but just didn't implement very well. Can you share any examples of how you were able to bring in, the legislative and policymaking communities into seeing firsthand how the grant programs or other programs are being executed and how that enhanced the policies that came out on the other end?
Yeah, I think one of the big successes that we like to talk about is our Absolute Advantage, which is a construction program. We actually worked with the Association for Construction. It helped us, ABC. They helped us to put together a training program that allowed us to give young people and adults, men and women, the basic skills necessary to get into construction. Not that they would be a tradesperson at this point, but they would be trade ready. So we began to work with them to build a training program with dollars provided to us from the government that gave us flexibility to do so. And then we worked with the community, the construction industry, and asked, can you help us design this program so that we can make people ready to go to big step, union opportunities or non-union opportunities, to start the process of becoming either electricians, plumbers, roofers, carpenters, whatever that goal is for those individuals. But what you have to have is the private sector and the legislative sector working with social service agencies to design programs that make sense not only for the clients that we work with, but it also fits the demand needs for the jobs in which they're interested in filling. So there's matches there where you have a demand and you have a supply. How do you design things in a way that the supply fits the need? And it takes everybody working together. In this particular case, we got support from non-government agencies to design it. We got support from the government to provide flexibility in how we use those funds. And then we got the business community telling us, here's what I need. And guess what? I'll send people in to help train. And so that has really represented for us a really good program that's moving people into careers that have long-term benefits for them if they stick to that particular type of career. But at a minimum, people learn skills that's going to be transferable to other industries.
Mm-hmm. That's great. What a great success story. I love that. Now let's go back to Rep. Brostoff. There's so much to learn from the sign language interpreters bill that you were referencing earlier, and also just how good you look with the Jufro. But on top of that, I think there's so many young people right now who are getting active in civic engagement in politics, motivated by issues of racial injustice and a number of other issues. And my sense is the feeling among a lot of activists who I talk to is they're just hitting their head up against the wall. And we're protesting, we're just putting everything into this cause, but we're not seeing any momentum, legislatively. And so I guess I have a two-part question for you, Jonathan. One is, what can we learn from your story around disability rights that did demonstrate how communities organizing leads to tangible policy change? And let's start with that part of the question, and then I'll get to the second part. What can we learn from that part of the story?
Sure. Well, basically, I think that so let me also say, I'm actually wearing a shirt commemorating the 100th day, and I've been out marching before my most recent child was born for, it's been, about 130 plus days or so now, and I've been out marching for most of that, but I think that I know exactly what you mean. I think a lot of people, are feeling that now more than in a lot of periods of our recent history. And I think that the lesson to learn is one, persistence. Just don't take no. It's just you have to get to yes, and you just have to keep pushing and pushing until you get there. And I think that's an important lesson. There's me getting arrested during one of the Sherman Park uprising, even though I did nothing wrong. But it's a good example to highlight the police brutality and kind of situation going on. There's us talking about the Dreamers and the attacks on immigrants that myself and Representative Cabrera and Senator Larson kind of led legislatively. But all these are examples that it's not about nothing in politics. Nothing in our community is static. It's not something something happens one day and that's it and it's over. It's something you have to grow. You have to build momentum. You have to keep pushing and pushing, keep growing the population that you want to be working with, as well as keep growing your influence. With the deaf bill, a lot of it was the silent stripping bill. A lot of it was actually based on some ignorance, and I wouldn't say necessarily maliciousness, but some of my colleagues were very hostile towards the idea that you even need licensed sign language interpreters, that there should be a bare minimum of competency, because they just didn't know the issue. And a lot of it was just actually going directly to their districts or bringing folks to the Capitol and having discussions one-on-one and saying, look, one case, for example, with, Teresa in rural Wisconsin was, she didn't have a real life interpreter in the hospital, and they had to rely on this, VRI situation where basically the doctor misinterpreted what her emergency was and gave her the wrong type of surgery that could have killed her. And only when her dad got there, where they, he rushed over, were they able to get things secured and save her life. But, no one should ever be placed in that situation, especially just because someone's deaf or whatever. So a lot of it was just basic education and getting the stories in front of the right people. And a lot of it is just persistence. And, when we began the process, it looked incredibly unlikely we'd be able to get any movement on it. But he said, we're going to get this done, and that's it, period. And we push and push and push and say that's the main lesson. And as far as the people marching the streets and all the activism around racism and police brutality going on, I would say there has been a lot of movement on that, actually, and that's been pretty encouraging at the municipal level. Things like Cudahy declaring racism a public health crisis, which frees up some municipal resources and offers some potential that wasn't there before. And the alderperson there who led the effort on it, Alderman Morales, said very clearly it wouldn't have happened without people marching, and that was a significant part of it. Or, we've seen other municipalities with banning chokeholds and body cams and, some other legislation that has been stalled for years and now is finally moving forward. So I think there is movement on it. It is actually happening, but the main lesson has just got to be persistence and push, and don't take no for an answer. It's just just because you didn't get to yes yet doesn't mean it's no. It just means you didn't get there yet. You just keep pushing. And if your cause is righteous and if you are hardworking, I do believe you will be successful. It's just, just takes work. You just got to push it and don't take no for an answer. And keep building. There's a lot of people who support you, who feel the same way, who want to work on it. Find those people, keep building momentum, keep working towards it.
Yeah, I think that message about persistence is so important for a lot of new people who are getting involved right now to recognize that, yes, we have urgency, but if you look historically, these problems do take often years to solve. And you alluded earlier, Jonathan, about the bipartisan angle of the sign language interpreters bill. Mm-hmm. And what some of our audience may not know is that you're very active with a program with Millennial Action Project called the Wisconsin Future Caucus, which is the bipartisan caucus of young elected officials in the state legislature, where you're building that dialogue and building those bipartisan relationships So take us a little bit behind the scenes. I think when people just read headlines about politics, polarization is often the main, underlying theme of everything you hear. It's just one tribe versus the other tribe. You found a way to break through that. So tell us how you did that. Tell us about bringing on the first Republican onto your bill to make it officially a bipartisan bill.
Well, there's two that I'll highlight. One is Representative Skoronsky, and one is former Representative Kleefisch, who's now left and become a lobbyist. But at that time, he was a state representative. And people might know the name because his wife was a former lieutenant governor. Now, politically speaking, we couldn't be more further apart as far as the polarization in our politics. Although with Skoronsky, one of the things I realized we had to do is we had to have some people coming to the Capitol and physically being there, because one of the benefits of there you are. Look at you go. One of the we got Charlie too. All right. And there we go. Tyler is from Wisconsin. He was very supportive. Representative Rodriguez. So one of the big things that we did is having basically people who were deaf and were very passionate about this issue actually meeting and talking with their legislators. And that was a big aspect of, for example, Representative Rodriguez, who's there, the head of the Wisconsin Association for the Deaf at the time, Katie, happened to live in her district. And after talking it over with her and having this direct conversation and being able to communicate exactly why it was so important, she was like, oh yeah, let me sign on to this, let me get on board. And the two main people I got, Representative Skoronsky and then Representative Kleefisch, I got to support because Skoronsky's staffer, actually his main staffer, who's basically his chief of staff, she was studying to be a sign language interpreter in college. And she came to one of the events and I spoke with her and I had a great conversation. All right, you know about this, let's get it on board. And she was able to convince her boss, and he was totally, once he got it, he was totally on board as well. And with Representative Kleefisch, he basically was really concerned about the job discrimination aspect of it and how many people were not getting access to the workforce because of being deaf. Sorry, I'm really distracted by this video. That's a great video. So basically, Skoronsky got on board and Kleefisch got on board, and then they were able to talk to a couple of their buddies, and I kept having the conversation. People knew it was something I was genuinely passionate about, and I just kept calling. I met with all the legislators directly. I talked with them, but really Kleefisch and Skoronsky were the two main champions in the assembly, and then in the Senate, it was Senator, on the Republican side, it was Senator Patrick, oh my gosh, I'm spacing on his last name.
Is it Senator Testin?
Pat Testin, yeah. I'm on very little sleep with my newborn, so excuse me, but Senator Testin was, and I actually asked him if he wanted to join us for his panel, but I just missed each other on it, but he was a great champion in the Senate, and I think it's more from a humanitarian side of things from him. I'm not quite sure, but that was the sense I got. But basically, once you kind of crack that, once we cracked that barrier, and the hostility I was met with initially was more so, I think, people being ignorant to the issue as opposed to actually genuinely disliking deaf people or having, hatred for the deaf community or anything like that. And part of it was getting a couple of champions on the Republican side, and then the next part was just pure education and getting people to talk and meet. And again, just having access. Some people never even had met deaf people before, and certainly I heard over and over and over people who came to the Capitol for the legislative day kept telling me, "Oh, I never even knew I could talk to a politician before. This is amazing. Thank you so much." Which they're trying to be complimentary, but it's actually kind of a sad thing if you think about it. It's like, yo, why shouldn't everyone have access to your employees, your legislators who work for you? So, something's going on there. So, but anyway, it was a really good example of the sort of opportunity you gain through access. And some of that access can be as simple as having face-to-face conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think one huge takeaway from that experience is just, you didn't write anyone off. You didn't kind of assume people would be against it, and really listened and was able to genuinely build relationships and build buy-in. And I think that's amazing. And that's exactly the methodology we need more so in politics. And that's what we used for that video. And I can give a little bit more context of what that is. So it was the first ever bipartisan PSA for voting in Wisconsin this cycle, and included, as you saw there, a bipartisan group of young representatives, as well as a couple of comedians, Charlie Behrens and Kristen Bry. And I think when you hear about voting issues in Wisconsin, just like a number of social justice issues, it can be seen through the lens of partisanship and polarization. But just as we learned from leaders like Representative Brostoff, that we really want to have an inclusive approach, bring people in. And we did find shared values and common ground. And that's how we got the bipartisanship in for that video, which, as we approach this election, it's so important that there's bipartisan buy-in into our voting system, especially with the absentee ballots. We're going to see over 1 million Wisconsinites use the absentee voting process. So thank you, Representative Brostoff, for just being an example of how to express empathy and build coalitions in our politics, when it can often get so vicious when it's left to its own devices. Now, let's go back to the corporate perspective with Adam. And we've been talking about government and the legislative communities and how you build partnerships there. From my interactions with Northwestern Mutual, I know they are very interested in maintaining a bipartisan posture for a number of the issues that they're working on, whether it's entrepreneurship or some of the diversity and inclusion efforts that you referenced earlier. Tell us a bit more about that. Tell us, how does Northwestern Mutual engage with the policymaking community in order to move some of these solutions forward? And how do you do that in a bipartisan way?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we actually have a whole area that does a lot of that work. So there is a government relations team that works really closely with folks, of course, across the aisle. And Steve, exactly what you said. I mean, it being a bipartisan position that we have as being a company here in Milwaukee. I mean, we are very much committed to serving our policyholders, which is obviously what Northwestern Mutual does, and also making sure that we're doing things that are really in the best interest of the city of Milwaukee. So I think it's actually a pretty easy thing for us to really pay close attention to, is mainly because we've been here for as long as we have. And the success of the city, regardless of political affiliation, is ultimately going to be in the best interest of not only the city, but also, of course, our organization. So I actually think it's a very easy thing to do. There's a lot of really smart people that are involved with that type of connection point across the state. And it's really something that we take very seriously in terms of how we are very supportive of really what's happening across the community to make sure that's something that's positive. And as Milwaukee goes with so many of these large corporations here, I think everybody has a unique position to play, whether or not they're in the political sphere. And I think Northwestern Mutual really does a pretty good job of balancing those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And to bring in George here on this conversation, I think, efforts to alleviate poverty in our community really will gain the most traction or probably make the most difference if we can frame it and build a bipartisan coalition. But it's not easy. I know it's not easy. I have a mentor who says, he has this great line. He says, political bridge building and bridge building in general is not rocket science. It's even harder. And so when it relates to the issues that you're working on, George, how do you build that bipartisan coalition, but also tell us about some of the ideas that you get, and not necessarily that you have to agree with 100% of them, but how do you kind of merge the different ideas that you're hearing into a new place of consensus around poverty issues?
Well, like I said earlier, I think people take and try to bundle poverty into, and I think there's way too much blame on people who live in poverty and say it's because they're lazy or whatever. There's a lot of systemic reasons why we have poverty. And I think part of the problem that we have in our nation is we have an ignorance to those systems and to the things that cause poverty for individuals to live in poverty. I actually was born in poverty. I was a product of poverty, but I was also successful in being able to get out of poverty. But that was through the efforts of others who helped me do that, who gave me a chance to be able to prove that the stereotypes around people who living in poverty, especially about people of color, were able to be demystified, the improvement. We learned. I was able to help people see that that just wasn't true. And then people try to say, look at you, you must be different. I'm no different, believe me. In many cases, I am exactly what you see in the streets. But the difference is somebody trusted and believed in me and gave me an opportunity to actually prove that I could be all that I could be. So you start there. I think the problem that we have in our community is we have ignorance and the lack of willingness to listen to each other's perspective. A lot of times we talk about diversity and we look at it from a color perspective and not from a historical lens, a process of understanding that these are my understandings of the world, which may be different than yours. But if we share those understandings, even if we don't agree with them, we learn from each other. And if we can learn from each other, then we can begin to maybe find common grounds in which we can begin to work together. And working together is a key to making sure we resolve issues, because most issues cannot be resolved unless you have a diverse set of lenses on an issue. Because all of us, while we all look at an issue and have ideas about what it should be, ideas about what we see, we don't see it from other people's perspectives. So if we can look at and then talk to each other about our different perspectives, I think in some respects we'll have an appreciation for each other, where we come from, our differences, and also have an opportunity to talk about, okay, where do we have common ground where we can make a difference? I think when I think about people who look at people who are in poverty and then say, okay, they're just lazy, I'm saying, do you really know anybody who lives in poverty? You know, it's that whole concept where people say, oh, I understand Black people because I know one person. That's not going to give it to you. You need to know people. You need to talk to them. Because if you talk to people, and I would say from the other perspective too, there's an opportunity when we bring people who live in poverty and talk to people who have means to have a better sense of we're all human beings. We all have struggles. We may have different resources in order to deal with those struggles. I'll give you an example. I talked to a person, I was doing a presentation one time about being evicted and why people get evicted. And things there's many reasons why people get evicted. But in this particular case, it's because, okay, somebody was, they had issues with drug and alcohol. And so as a result, they weren't able to, that addiction impacted their ability to pay their bill. Well, what happened to that person who lives in poverty is they get kicked out. They get their record diminished for the future opportunity to get homes. And then they're in the streets. And even if they have family, their kids are out in the streets with them. Well, I was talking to this one young lady, a lady who's a mother, like I am a father, who said that happened to my child. But she had means. And guess what happened? She said, my child had a drug addiction. She got evicted. But our family was able to take our wealth and make sure she was okay. And so she doesn't carry the same kind of residual impact for having the same kind of problems. So we have to begin to understand that while we have similarities, we have differences by circumstance, not because of who we are.
That's right. Yeah. George, that dynamic you're pointing to about building awareness and building education, I think has been in some ways transformative over the last few months for a number of friends who I've spoken to who have gained a new consciousness of what systemic racism has meant in their community. And that does cut across. I mean, I've seen people you would not expect to be involved in racial justice work feeling that when they became more aware of what's really going on and the decades and centuries that go into that, it really does bring more people in to the conversation. It reminds me of, so there's a new documentary out called The Reunited States. It'll be playing at the Milwaukee Film Festival. And it highlights a few bridge builders who are trying to depolarize America. And one of the stories is about a couple from rural Texas that they sold their house, spent a year traveling on an RV to learn about what's driving America so apart. And they realized that they really had to look inside and learn about the systemic issues that have really oppressed Black Americans, Native Americans, and a number of other Americans, and it's led to this real awakening. So to me, seeing stories like that make me hopeful that it is possible to build diverse coalitions. As you point out, George, you need diverse coalitions to create change. So let's move into the final part of this conversation, which is forward-looking, and it's about our vision for the future of Milwaukee and our state. And as the title of the panel suggests, what are the small steps that we can take to ultimately achieve big changes? And maybe I'll go to Adam as we start off on this question. As you project out the next 5 to 10 years, the work that you're doing at NM and also the work that you're seeing on the ground, what are some of those small steps that you plan to take to ultimately lead to big changes?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I really focus on being forward thinking in my life and paying attention to what's possible and not necessarily what has been. And the biggest thing when you think about taking some small steps and doing things differently, to me, it's all about connection. It's all about an ability to break down silos as individuals, but also collectively across of our different organizations and our systems. And it's my belief that there's nothing that people can't solve when it comes to challenges or problems. And something that Milwaukee has a great deal of is really, really good people. So the question is how do we make it easier for us to all get in a room together and, kind of as was alluded to before, not only bring the diversity of our identities, but our perspectives to bear on all of these different challenges and problems that are high dimensional tasks that need to be worked on and come up with solutions. And I think the simplest way to do that is that we have to spend more time with one another. As it's kind of alluded to with this, the ability to sort of reach across the aisle, if you will, and say, how are we spending time with people that we may have perceived differences with, but are probably a lot more the same than we necessarily realize. I think that's the first thing. We've got to have more connection. I think the secondary thing is that systems have to be changed. And it's not always a popular opinion, but there needs to be a rebuilding of things. There's a really amazing podcast. I'm a big podcast fan. And it's from Scene on Radio, and I believe it's done out of documentary studies at Duke University. It's called The Land That Has Never Been Yet. And it does a really great job of talking about what has been put in place in the United States of America that has also led to a lot of the challenges that exist. And we were talking about a little bit before the session kicked off about how it's Smallwaukee. I think the beauty of Smallwaukee is that it's really easy to get connected with other people. We're 1-2 degrees separated from just about anybody in this city. But it can also be challenging, and people can also keep doors closed. So the vision of the future that I have is I have a vision of open doors. I have a vision of people being able to connect with anybody that they need to at any time to get things done. With this idea and this future focus of saying, how do we make a Milwaukee that's really built by and for everyone that's part of this community? And if we do something like that, I have a real strong feeling that as we look back when we're in 2030, when we're in 2025, we're going to say we've removed the barriers and did everything we possibly could to create this kind of future we aspire to. But it's about connection, man. You've got to be able to get people in the same room to work collectively on our challenges.
Absolutely. I think connection is the theme of this panel. Now, George, tell us more about your vision for the future of Milwaukee. And I think a lot of people tuning in right now are really moved by the issues that you're focused on and looking for what are those small steps they can take. So I think it'll be really helpful to hear from you, George. What are some small steps that you're planning to take to ultimately lead to big changes down the road? George, I think you might be on mute.
First of all, I think we have to have faith that we can actually make a difference. And I think we can. Yes, it may take generations. And when I think about it from the standpoint of my life, I grew up in the 60s. I watched the 60s movement. I'm so proud. I'm so proud of what young people are doing today. That has reactivated me to be more aggressive about my language and discussion around change. We can change the system, and we can make sure that everybody has a fair opportunity to be successful. And guess what? It's not going to take away anything from anybody else. We've got to stop thinking if we're going to help somebody be successful, it's going to make me less successful. And the other thing I want to say is I think where it starts is, and somebody said this earlier, it starts with yourself. It starts with yourself, examining yourself and ask the question, how do I contribute to some of these issues that we have? We have one of the most segregated cities. We have the most segregated city in the country, especially for a large metropolitan area, a large urban area. That does not work, because if it did, we wouldn't have as many issues in our community today as we do. So those are the kinds of things we need to say, this is not working. This doesn't make any sense for us to separate ourselves like this, to be able to have people not be together just because they look different, but are not different. That's the crazy thing. We look different mostly because of the effects of the sun on our bodies when we weren't able to fly around and become closer together. But we tend to think that that means that we're different. We're no different. We are human beings. We have different skin tones. We may have different perspectives on life because of our experience in life, but we're still all the same. I think that it starts with, and corporations have to look within themselves first. You know, you hear a lot of CEOs talking about, I support this and I support that. Well, if you support it, do something different in your organization. And if we all do things differently, then we'll have change. But if we just wait for everybody to do something different while we sit and continue to do the same old thing, nothing's going to change. I'm too old to sit back at this point and allow people to just talk. It's time for action. You have to begin to change the way you do things. And hell, if you do it wrong, that's okay. Then try change it again and do it the right way. Keep doing it until you get it right.
Yeah.
But we can't keep doing the same old thing. Milwaukee's been segregated even before Black folks got here. We need to stop being so segregated and start working together.
Yeah, well said. Well said. Thank you. And let's wrap it up with Rep. Brostoff. And I think it's safe to say that you'll be reelected this November. And so tell us about some of the small steps you're planning to take. I mean, you've been out there, as those alluded to earlier, around justice issues. And I think a lot of people are wondering what are small steps they can take. So as a legislator, what are some of the steps you're going to take to hopefully get some change maybe next year?
Well, I think the biggest thing, so one of the really exciting things for me, and something I found personally very invigorating, is all the people marching, all the civic participation, people going to the Wauwatosa municipal, the Common Council meetings or the equity inclusion, meetings, and like actually stepping up the involvement. I talked to a bunch of people who actually never, been involved like that before, never did anything like that. And I think that this, for a myriad of circumstances that all kind of come together at this one moment in history, there's a real movement afoot. And we've had kind of like civil rights epochs in previous generations of this country's history, and it's often been met with brutality or with, naysayers or people who just want to keep status quo, even if it's, harmful status quo, stuff like that. But I think that the lesson to draw from it is just keep pushing and again, don't accept no for an answer, just keep working. And so I'm going to bring that energy back with me to Madison, and I'm going to keep pushing my colleagues who aren't there yet, and I'm going to do my best to get them there. And I'm also not going to take any crap. I'm not going to, as I normally don't, I'm not going to let anyone get away with, it's talking something slick out of the side of their mouth or making some sort of comment that's, demeaning or, poo-pooing a group or trying to dismiss when people are doing stuff like that. So I'm going to be very proactive and kind of blunt about everything as I normally am, but I'll do it in a respectful manner. And the thing that I'm hoping to do is bring more people to the Capitol with me, is bring people up to Madison, making sure we can get people involved and, kind of taking that energy, not just to the streets, but also the chambers of power, stuff like that, and get more people involved. So that's my inspiration for this particular situation.
I love it, Jonathan. And I also love your background because you're at the state capitol right now and no one else is there. So you're working overtime. And I think
it's Milwaukee. There we go. Just like
Exactly. Well, as we come to a close here, I'm just so grateful to all three of our panelists and to No Studios for hosting this conversation. It's, I think, a topic that's been on the minds of so many people. How do we actually translate our vision for change into action? And we've heard three distinct ways of how to do that. in the NGO space, in the corporate space, and in the legislative space. And so to continue the conversation, please do get in touch with one of our respective organizations. I'm sure we'll find a way to get links out to you. And of course, when you're in Madison, pay Representative Brostoff a visit. And also do stay tuned for that film I mentioned earlier. We've been a part of producing it, called The Reunited States, part of the Milwaukee Film Festival, which deals directly with the issues that we've been talking about on this panel. We'll have a film festival panel tomorrow or Monday at 6 o'clock Central Time. So definitely check that out. The final thing I'll leave everyone with is a conversation I had with Martin Luther King III, who's Dr. King's oldest son. And he was involved with a Millennial Action Project forum that we hosted about a similar topic. And I was asking him, what do you think your father would be doing and responding to the polarization and disillusionment of this moment? And he said very simply, my father would be calling us to a higher order, higher consciousness. And I think that's what the leaders on this panel are doing. I think that's what our community and our state and really our nation needs right now, calling people to that higher order as we create change, doing so with love and that radical empathy that Dr. King spoke of. So thank you all so much for tuning in on a Saturday evening. Thank you to No Studios, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you.
Bye.
It's your boy, Nile X Nile. Music to me is freedom. It's a sense of security and knowing that I can literally express off the top of my head anytime I feel without regrets. I enjoy just being a part of something as big as this, and that's what I feel like music means to me.
When she be on a baby rude, I treat it like ice and I keep it cool.
Music to me is the greatest form of expression. It's versatile, it's multifaceted. It's just whatever you need it to be in whatever moment you want it. It's like the alpha and the omega type shit. There is nothing without music,
When I'm listening to music, it makes me feel like I'm the only person in the world. It helps me alleviate all my problems and allows me to escape into a song in a different universe.
Music is my soul, and the reason why I feel empowered to be myself every day. Without it, I probably would be a boring person. Am I supposed to keep talking?
I'm a fight for a tall little beast when it come to this. I'm the light of the
That is really what music means to me. It is the thing I need when I'm feeling a little crazy. Music is everything to me. It's a release, it's work, it's patience and practice, it's love, it's everything.
This year, absentee voting is more important than ever because we're living in a pandemic.
Folks, how are you? It's me, Charlie, the host of the Man Walk Minute.
I'm State Representative Tyler Vorpagel.
I'm State Representative Jesse Rodriguez.
I'm State Representative Daniel Reamer.
I'm State Representative Lakeisha Myers.
I'm Kristen Bry.
I'm Stephen Olikara, founder and CEO of the Millennial Action Project.
You know, I love it when the Packers score early in a game. It makes me less stressed in the fourth quarter. The same is true for voting.
Have you made your plans to vote yet?
Absentee voting is voting by mail or in person early before the election day this November.
Take it from someone who would rather go hungry than ever wait in line for brunch. If you give me an option where I don't have to wait in line to vote, I'm gonna take it.
Many of you have received absentee ballot requests through the mail, and that was a bipartisan decision here in Wisconsin.
And if you're registered to vote, you would have gotten something in the mail from the Wisconsin Elections Commission telling you the 3 ways you can vote.
Now, if you're not registered to vote, gosh darn shoot, you better do that because you got till October 14th to make it happen.
How does absentee voting work? Well, a voter requests an absentee ballot at myvote.wi.gov. Their municipal clerk mails them their ballot. The voter fills it out, signs the envelope, and gets a witness to sign and put their address on the envelope. And then they can either mail it back or drop it off at their clerk's office.
Or you can take it to a ballot drop-off box thing, you know, a big magic ballot box.
Our democracy works best when everyone gets out to vote.
I'm voting absentee myself. I've already checked my registration status, and I encourage you to do the same.
I vote early every chance I can. You can vote early too.
Voting early at your municipal clerk's office, or voting absentee by mail.
It's a simple and safe and secure way to vote without ever leaving your home. You know, that way you can Donald Duck it when you vote. And by that I mean vote without pants.
1, it's safe. 2, it's free. How many things in life can you say that about? 3, no waiting in line.
And 4, did I mention you don't need to wear pants?
And it's fun.
October 29th is the final day you can request an absentee ballot. But why wait that long? Early voting in Wisconsin starts October 20th and ends November 1st. You guessed it, check myvote.wi.gov for locations in your area.
That way you can score a touchdown early for your team.
Make sure your voice is heard and vote in this November's election.
I want you to join me in voting early.
I'm voting early. Are you?
Make sure you vote.
Make sure you vote.